At this time, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker, Kavita Shukla. Kavita is the founder and CEO of Freshglow Co, and inventor of FreshPaper, a unique innovation that addresses the massive global challenge of food waste. FreshPaper is used by farmers and families across the globe, and the Freshglow Co has partnered with some of the largest retailers in the world, from Whole Foods to Walmart. Kavita holds 4 patents and is the youngest woman to ever receive the Biennial Index Design to Improve Life Award, the world's largest prize for design. Her story of simple beginnings, belief, and empowerment was the subject of a short film by Hollywood director Bryce Dallas Howard. Kavita, her work has been featured by the New York Times, the Washington Post, Bloomberg, Oprah Magazine, Glamour, The Today Show, and CNN. She's been named one of Fast Company's 7 entrepreneurs changing the world, Forbes 30 Under 30, and Time Magazine's 5 most innovative women in food. Kavita holds a Bachelor of Arts from Harvard University, and today we're honored to have her tell her story and share with us how she started. Kavita, thank you.
Thank you, Sean. I am just so excited to be here. It's so inspiring to be in a room full of inventors and innovators. So thank you so much to Sean and everybody on this team for inviting me to be part of this incredible event. So my story actually begins here. This is a picture of me with my grandmother when I used to live in India. And this is us in her kitchen, which was just this simple little room. And, I immigrated to the United States with my family when I was a young girl, and I didn't really get to see my grandmother much after that. So once, when I was 12 years old, and my mom came to me and said that we would be going to India to visit my grandmother, I was so excited. But my mom was pretty nervous. She was worried about how I might adjust to being back, and mostly she was really worried about the fact that I should not drink any tap water at all. So, of course, on my first day there, I was brushing my teeth and I drank almost an entire cup of water. Just in this haze of jet lag, I drank a cup of water and I started to panic. But my grandmother, she calmly went in her kitchen and she made this mixture of different spices, and she came back with this and said, "Oh, just drink this and you will be totally fine." I was pretty skeptical. I didn't really know what to make of this murky brown mixture that my grandma gave me, but I didn't really have any other option. So I decided to try her remedy. So I drank the whole mixture and I waited, and I actually ended up not getting sick at all. And I still remember, for me as a little girl, that moment was almost magical. I couldn't believe that my grandmother, with these very simple ingredients, with her really limited resources, that she could have created something that I thought was so powerful in her simple little kitchen. And it really sparked my curiosity. So when I got back home to Maryland, I decided to start a little middle school science project to learn more about these spices that my grandmother had taught me about. It was a pretty simple idea. In my 12-year-old mind, I hypothesized that maybe these spices that my grandmother had given me had somehow kept me from getting sick by cleaning the water in my stomach. So pretty basic, not very sophisticated. But I went out and I got different jars and I added pond water and different combinations of spices. And that was the idea. But as many 12-year-olds are, I was pretty distracted. I had lots of pets. I had a menagerie in my garage. I had lots of inventions I was always working on. And to be honest, I kind of forgot about my project. And then a few weeks later, my mom asked me to go clean out my experiments in the garage. And I remember going into the garage and seeing something really fascinating. A lot of the jars had gunk growing in them, but I noticed that a couple of the jars were clean. It looked like the water was actually completely clean. And for me, I was utterly fascinated. I started to think that, maybe these ingredients that my grandmother had taught me about, maybe they were in some way able to slow mold or to somehow keep the water from growing more gunk, is how I described it in my early experiments. So I started to become kind of obsessed with spices and the power of botanicals, and this idea that we could use natural ingredients to address something that I thought could be as challenging as mold growth. And so, I was really excited about this, but as a child, I didn't really know how to apply what I thought was this incredible knowledge that my grandmother had shared with me. And then one day, I went grocery shopping with my mom. And she asked me to pick out a box of strawberries. And I still remember, I was so frustrated. I noticed that all the strawberries seemed to have fuzz growing on the bottom. And that was when I had this kind of aha moment. I thought, I wonder what would happen if I took some of these strawberries home and dipped them in my mixtures in the garage. I wonder what might be possible. And so I remember running home and trying it. And a few days later, I went in the garage and I was just astounded. I could not believe it. And so I asked my mom to take me back to the grocery store. I got lots of different fruits and vegetables, and every single time I was just blown away by the results. So to make a really long story short, after spending most of high school as this weird girl meticulously rotting fruits and vegetables in my garage, I created FreshPaper. And FreshPaper is an incredibly simple concept. If you were to just put this sheet into a refrigerator drawer or a bag or a carton filled with fruits and vegetables, it would actually keep everything in there fresh for up to 2 to 4 times longer. Now, if you've ever gone home and opened your fridge and found moldy berries or soggy spinach, you personally know how frustrating and expensive and disgusting food spoilage can be. The average American family actually throws away over $2,000 worth of food because of waste and spoilage. So it's no wonder that healthy eating is starting to feel inaccessible for most. With the cost of waste, eating fresh can actually feel like a luxury. But I actually wasn't even thinking of consumers when I designed FreshPaper. I was thinking of people like my grandmother. Because FreshPaper is so simple and so low cost, it can be used by large-scale growers with fields of produce beyond what the eye can see, but it can also be used by small-scale growers who are bringing their harvest to the side of the road every single day across the globe. Today, despite all the technology we have, we lose over 1/3 of our world's food supply to spoilage. The world's farmers actually grow enough food to feed every single person on the planet, but over 800 million people still go hungry every single day. So this small sheet of paper, I thought, could significantly reduce spoilage and the massive land, water, energy, and human costs associated with it by slowly reducing food waste from farm to fork. So basically, I peaked in middle school. But really, I was 17 years old. I was a senior in high school when I found out that I would be awarded a patent for my simple little idea. It was a pretty unlikely outcome to my story, possible only in this country. Even at that age, I was really aware that my grandmother, with all of her brilliance, she never had the opportunity to pursue her ideas. And here I was at 17, on my way to college. I had 2 patents, and I was going to be able to do anything, I thought, with my ideas. So as soon as I got out to college, I couldn't wait to get my idea out into the world. I remember, when my family immigrated to the United States, we could have never imagined that I would have the opportunities that I did. And I couldn't stop thinking about how my idea might be able to help people like my grandmother in areas like the village where she was from. So when I was in college, I started immediately consulting every expert who would talk to me, all of my college professors, everybody that I thought might know something about bringing this idea to the world. But what I ended up learning is how hard it can actually be to give something away for free. It wasn't just all of the complexities involved in production and distribution. I felt like at every step, I kept hearing that this idea was just not realistic, that it was a child's idea, and that I would never be able to find the funds and the resources and the experience to be able to scale it up, to actually bring it out into the world. So it was only a couple days before graduation that I actually finally became convinced that this wasn't a realistic idea, and I actually gave up. I graduated and I hadn't lined anything else up. So one of my college professors, my thesis advisor, actually kindly offered me a part-time job doing research, and I started to think about what maybe I could do next. But to be honest, I couldn't stop thinking about my idea. I couldn't see past it. I was just obsessed that this thing that I had started working on when I was 12, that maybe it could be useful to someone somewhere. And being a researcher slowly also made me realize that even the best ideas aren't useful to anyone at all if they're left in the lab, or in my case, my kitchen. So it was more than 10 years after I first started working on my idea that I finally found a little bit of courage to give myself and my middle school science project just one more chance. One day after work, I stayed up all night and I handmade a batch of FreshPaper in my tiny kitchen in my studio apartment. It was honestly not much bigger than this podium right here. And I started to make some sheets. I stayed up the entire night. And the next morning, not really knowing what to expect, I took a borrowed folding table, I walked down the street, and I just set up a little table and started to hand out sheets of FreshPaper to anyone who would stop by, which honestly was not a lot of people. And actually, if you look at this photo, you might see that in the corner there's some cupcakes. And I had brought those to kind of bribe people to stop because I was pretty sure that no one was going to stop to hear about this crazy little sheet of paper. So, not a lot of people stopped, but a couple of people were really excited and they were really engaged and they wanted to learn more. And I sent them home with some FreshPaper. And that was enough encouragement for me to come back the next week. So I came back. And as the weeks went on, throughout that summer in Boston, something incredible started to happen. People started to come up to us, and they wanted to share their stories about how this idea was actually helping them feed their families. I couldn't believe it. Here, this entire time, I had been trying to figure out how to get my idea across the globe, and spoilage, it turned out, was this huge problem right in my own backyard. So it was a breakthrough. I realized that there were people in my own community that were struggling to be able to afford to feed their families fresh, healthy food, and they really needed this idea. That changed everything for me. I started to realize that I could start really small, I could start local, I could have that really big dream, but I could start right in my own backyard at my farmer's market. So I didn't even know it at the time, but a movement had already begun that very first day at the farmer's market. Our earliest supporters were already going into their local stores and they were telling them about FreshPaper. They believed in us and they supported our mission and they were buying FreshPaper for their friends, for their families, for local farmers, for schools, and even for their neighborhood food banks. Because of them, just 8 months later, we actually started taking wheelbarrows full of FreshPaper to our tiny local post office and shutting it down during the lunch hour to start to ship FreshPaper to farmers and families all across the country. And then not long after that, we got a call from Whole Foods. And I'll never forget walking into that meeting with Whole Foods. At the time, it was just me and my co-founder and our intern, Kevin. And that was the whole company at the time. And I kind of thought that if we all went, they would think maybe we were a lot bigger and they might take us more seriously. So Kevin was this urban gardening college student who I had met at a farmer's market, and he just really believed in this idea. And actually, the first thing he said to me when we met was, I really think FreshPaper needs to be in every Whole Foods across the country. And so Kevin was beyond excited. And I remember piling into his car. I didn't have a car at the time, and Kevin's car didn't have air conditioning. And if you've ever been in Boston in July, you know what a challenge that can be. So that was about a 20-minute drive that we went just trying to strategize and discuss. And I remember Kevin said, this is it, it's gonna happen, I can feel it. And I remember telling him that, the goal here is to get into one Whole Foods store, our store that's just down the street. And if we can figure out how to get into that store, how to figure out packaging and figure out how to scale, maybe one day we can start to scale into our region. And then one day, maybe in 5 years, we could think about going national. So that was the goal. And I was so scared that they wouldn't think that we were big enough to be able to support our local store, which was really quite a big store. So Kevin, of course, had different ambitions, and we came up with this strategy, and we arrived at the meeting just drenched in sweat. And we had our plan, and I remember as soon as we sat down, we kind of had to forget about our plan because all they asked us was to just share what it was that we had been working on. And I'll never forget, a couple minutes later, they looked at us and they said, we like it. How would you feel about launching the entire North Atlantic? Do you think you could do that at the end of the summer, which was just a couple of weeks away? And I remember we didn't even look at each other. All three of us at the exact same time, we just nodded and said, absolutely. And I remember we just left in this silence with these huge grins on our faces. And then we walked into the elevator and we were just terrified. And we stared at each other in absolute fear because we had never even thought about scaling our production. We had never even thought about going past that farmer's market. And here we were about to launch in the entire North Atlantic region of Whole Foods. So it was pretty exciting. It was a little bit daunting for sure, and I still don't really know how we pulled it off, but with the help of our friends and our families, everybody in our community, and with a lot of coffee, we actually managed to make our first delivery to Whole Foods, I think a couple of weeks later, and that's actually a photo of our first drop-off. That's our distribution vehicle, an old Toyota Corolla. that we borrowed from one of our friends that we brought, and we rolled up into this sea of 18-wheelers. And I remember when they opened the dock, and the guys laughed for a second, but then they were really nice, and they helped us unload. And for the entire summer, I think for the next 6 months, we actually made all of our deliveries, leaving Boston at 4 a.m., driving about 3 or 4 hours in that car, and just delivering our goods. So that was how we started to scale. And about 48 hours after this picture was taken, we launched in Whole Foods stores across the North Atlantic. It was incredible. And the movement started to grow as we expanded into more stores. We heard from people across the country. And today, FreshPaper is on the shelves of retailers like Whole Foods and Walmart, and in over 35 countries across the globe. And I found myself having experiences like going on live television to reach over 100 million people through networks like QVC and HSN. And we recently sold over 1 million sheets in less than 24 hours on HSN. So it has been an incredible journey. And the scale that we have since achieved has enabled us to start working with nonprofits like the Food Bank of New York City and Vital Voices, organizations that I've long admired that are doing incredible work to improve food access in their communities across the globe. That first day at the farmers market, we actually started with $300 in paper-making supplies. We had no funding, no marketing budget, no experience. But remarkably, what started in my grandmother's kitchen launched this movement that took me and my tiny little piece of paper to places I could have never imagined. I'll never forget the day that I actually came home from doing a demo at Whole Foods. I remember I'd been standing in the produce section. I was freezing cold, and I just couldn't wait to get home and take a warm shower. But at the time, my cell phone was also our customer service line. So, I would often have to make sure that I didn't miss a single phone call. And I thought it was going to be a customer getting ready to place an online order. But the voice on the other end of the line said that they were calling from Denmark. So I didn't really understand at first. And then I thought what they were saying to me was a prank. But they actually were inviting me to come to Copenhagen to accept the Index Award, the world's largest prize for design, which had previously been awarded to Apple and Tesla. So and it was really on faith that I bought those tickets and I got on the plane. I still didn't really believe any of it was real. But a little while later, I found myself on stage with Crown Princess Mary of Denmark. And I started to realize that things were going to change. Pretty soon, my life started to become this series of pinch myself moments. I found myself meeting Oprah, ringing the stock market opening bell, sharing my American dream story in Congress, and speaking at the Nobel Prize Dialogues in Stockholm. And even as I share all of this with you now, even as I look at this, it feels unbelievable because I could never have imagined that someone like me could have something like this happen to them. But I tell you the story because it could happen to anyone with an idea. But it almost didn't happen at all. Even though as a child, I really believed that I had discovered something that could help millions and take on something as complicated as global hunger, as I grew up, my mind started to tell me otherwise. I started to think that I would never be enough to bring my own invention into the world. Like many young women, I still remember all of those times I mentally replayed when I was told that I would need more experience, more degrees, more money, more than I had, and more than I was. That very first day that I stood at the farmer's market and I started to share my idea, I started to overcome the doubt that had crept into my mind, and the entire narrative of my story shifted. And today, I feel so privileged to be able to share my story with audiences across the globe. But what's been really surprising to me is how many times people have approached me and shared with me their own secret inventions. They're inventors of all ages, from all different backgrounds. And it has made me start to realize that, a lot of the answers to the world's greatest challenges, they're already out there. They're in somebody's mind. They're in a classroom in Harlem, they're in a village in India, they're in a factory in Detroit, and they're trapped by circumstances, not potential. And I look back at the 10 years that I was consumed by my own doubt, and I think about how, the moment that we invent or create, we start to walk that line between doubt and belief. And too often, we choose the easier path, and we dismiss our ideas before we even give them a chance. And I've started to think about, what if that had happened to that single mom living on welfare with a story that she just could not get out of her mind? Or what if that adopted college dropout, tinkering in his garage, who passionately believed that design and technology could change everything, didn't believe that he could take his idea one step further? Or what if that young girl from Mississippi, who could recite a poem better than anyone else had ever heard before, never thought it was possible for her to transcend her circumstances? Innovation is not just the purest expression of creativity. It's an act of tremendous vulnerability. So in order to foster innovation, I believe we have to reframe our understanding of who innovates and what innovation actually looks like. So I wanted to share with you some of the things that I've learned along this journey. And for me, I believe that we really have to think about the fact that inspiration can often come from the most unlikely of places. I could never have imagined that my grandmother's murky brown mixture would inspire my life's work. But inspiration often comes in forms that we could never anticipate, and the only thing that we can do is to be open to and aware of the world around us and to seek inspiration in every moment and through every experience. For years, I actually dismissed FreshPaper because I thought it was just too simple to ever work. I thought because it was an idea that was developed by a child, it would never be taken seriously. But today I've realized that FreshPaper is powerful because it's so simple. It can be used by anyone in any part of the world. So encouraging simplicity not only makes ideas more viable, it actually enables innovators without access to funding and sophisticated technology to actually have a chance. The trajectory of my life changed that day I took the very first step of going to my farmer's market. So I feel that we need to encourage innovators to actually focus on first steps, getting their ideas into the hands of people that could benefit from them, rather than focusing on their exit plan. All of us have the resources to help someone take that most transformative step with their idea. Because, not every entrepreneur is actually going to be able to raise millions of dollars. More likely than not, innovators actually have to build something from absolutely nothing. This is especially true for women and minorities. In 2018, women-founded companies received less than 2% of all VC funding in this country. But there is always a way forward. And even though it may not be the path you would expect, it is something that's possible. So we have to shift our metrics away from measuring the worth of an idea based on how much money a founder can raise. Over the years, I've come to realize that my story was never about a eureka moment or moments of serendipity. My story is really the story of all of those people who showed up just when I was about to give up and showed me how to take one more step forward. It's the story of people like my high school science teacher who convinced me that this idea was more than just a science fair project, and people like the patent examiner who took time out of her day to listen to a 16-year-old girl who walked into her office and helped her figure out how to protect her idea. It's the story of the people at the farmer's market who helped me overcome a decade of doubt, and people like Tony Russo, who you can see here, a third-generation farm stand owner who took a huge leap of faith to become one of our first customers and showed me how to build a business from the ground up the old-fashioned way. So, bringing your idea into the world is actually a tremendous act of vulnerability. And I believe that an innovator's #1 job is actually to push through resistance and self-doubt to reach your idea's potential. The opposite of success is not failure, it's not trying. Doubt kills more dreams than failure ever will. So, not a day goes by that I don't think about my grandmother, that I don't think about her mixture, and I think about, what if I had just dismissed her idea? What if I'd given in to my doubts all those years ago when I thought this idea was just too simple and too crazy to possibly work? Or what if nobody had stopped to talk to me that very first day at the farmer's market? So I'm here and I share my story with you so that you might share it with the unlikely innovators in your life, the people who don't quite fit in, the accidental entrepreneurs in your communities, because innovation is born out of discomfort. It happens at the margins. Innovation is often a way of life for the marginalized. So the next time you're faced with an idea that seems kind of crazy, maybe impossible, I hope you'll think about my story, because every single person in this room has the power to be that very first person who believes. Thank you.
So at this time, we're going to open the floor for questions, but I want to ask you a question first. As a young inventor, what was your experience in obtaining your patent? What challenges did you see and overcome? And what advice would you give to a younger inventor who may be here or watching today?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the biggest challenge for me was that I had no idea what to expect. So I was at a science fair where one of the judges suggested that I think about getting a patent for my idea, and that was amazing, and it changed my life. Every day I'm grateful to that person, because none of this would have been possible. But I think I had no idea where to even begin. And one thing that I think is incredible about an event like this, and the fact that today we have so many resources available even through your website and on the internet, is that we can get a lot of information and make sure that you are aware of everything that's needed to actually get your idea patented. So I think a great first step is to just understand what's necessary, and I think it's incredible that so much information is available now, even especially at an event like this, and then start to think about how you might be able to do it in a resourceful way. For me, I was very resource constrained, and so I met with the patent examiner. They were incredible and gave me some advice, and that was incredibly helpful. But I think there are so many organizations now, and I know the panel just before this spoke about that can help you, even if you don't have the resources to hire a lawyer or the funding, to start to think about how you can protect your ideas, because it is critical.
Speaking of protect your ideas and patents, have you had any issues with attempts to infringe upon your patent, and then also any knockoffs?
I'm glad you asked that question. One of the things that held me back for such a long time was just that. I remember I would stay up at night thinking, well, I'm just one person. And then when things started to go well, I actually got more terrified, because I thought, now I'm in Whole Foods, I'm going international retail. For sure, this is when one of the big guys, like a Monsanto, was going to come in. But what I honestly have to say has been incredible to me is how many people showed up to support me at every step. And one of my closest advisors has been a gentleman I met at a farmer's market who's actually a top IP attorney. And he gave me some really good advice. And I actually kept a lot of my process proprietary, as well as having the patent. But I think what was most surprising to me was that every single retailer that partnered with us and every single organization that took FreshPaper and supported it was doing it because they believed in our mission, they believed in my story, and they believed in what we were doing as a brand. So I think, having that protection for my idea gave me the foundation to be able to go out there and to share it with people. But I was surprised by how much consumers and retailers actually want to work with organizations that they believe in, and not potentially, a knockoff that might be made for half the price. So that was very encouraging, and that's something I encourage all of you to think about, is that it's important to have a North Star, which for us was our mission, and to align everything in your brand around that, because that matters to people as well.
You have a wonderful story to tell, but what I'm curious to know about is that in that story, the most important part you mentioned was there was one period, about 7 years, when your idea could have died. And you described many variables that kept it from perishing. Among all those other variables that saved it from getting lost, which one would you identify as the most important, most critical that saved the idea?
That's a great question. I think the day I went to the farmer's market, the day I could find that courage to overcome my own doubt, that was the moment that changed everything. And when I look back, everyone asks me, how did it take 10 years for you to go from finishing this idea to actually bringing it to market? And I think the biggest obstacle in everything that I described was my own self-doubt. I just never believed that somebody like me could be the person to bring my idea to the world. I thought my best hope was to find another company, another organization, another person who maybe was smarter or wealthier or more experienced, who could do something with my idea. But at the end of the day, and this kind of alludes to the previous question, I realized that it had to be me. And that was actually why people supported us, because they believed in it. So.
Hey, here to your right. So earlier, Hobo Live from, I run a consulting, but I'm trying to apply patent in wireless market, which is very big market, difficult to attack. But earlier you answered a question like touch upon trade secret versus patents, right? And you also talk about your science fair experience, George encouraged you. So I was really interesting. I think probably tap into a lot of fears in the audience. Like in your early days, how could that you haven't really disclosed your ideas through this back and forth in your early ages that prevent you really patent your core idea? I mean, how did it happen and why it didn't get disclosed? And how do you see like going out versus actually protect your ideas?
Sure. So, it was a long journey. And when I share my story, I kind of have to synthesize what was now almost over 20 years from when I first started working on this idea. And it was a long journey from something that I started making in my garage to actually producing millions and millions of sheets. And I think that was probably the most difficult, but also kind of the most fascinating and where I developed a lot of this knowledge on how to take this idea that I had patented, but then actually be able to manufacture it at a scale where it could be used. And I think, a lot of what we often get caught up is that 10 years down the road. You might have an idea, but often you can be held back by, well, how would I manufacture it to scale? Or am I disclosing too much right now about how it could have an impact further down the road? But I think, what I would encourage everyone to do is to think of your end user and try to have a conversation with them. And you may not want to disclose everything about your idea. But for me, I know sharing my idea at the farmer's market was that first step in actually realizing how it could be used. This was a technology that I only imagined as useful to somebody who was in the developing world in an environment without access to refrigeration. Every single day when I walk into a store and I see people buying it, it blows me away. But it just showed me that you have no idea what your invention could be and how people might use it and how it might be used in the world. So I think the first step is to just start to share the concept, whatever you might be comfortable with, those that could benefit from it, and iterate from there. And then start to get advisors who can help you figure out, once you figure out what that essence is, how to protect it.
So Kavita, what's next for you? Are you planning to sell this FreshPaper rest of your life? Or you have these wild neurons running and having more ideas?
Yeah, well, it's been a long journey for me to get from being that kid tinkering around my garage to being somebody who can do that again. And I remember when I was a little girl, my dream, I wanted to grow up and everyone would ask me, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I wanted to be an artist inventor. And people would always kind of laugh like, that's really cute, not a real job. And I feel really blessed every single day because, today, after everything that we've been through, and it hasn't been an easy road, I have the opportunity and the resources to actually create things every single day. And so, we just created a solution for grains and for bread. We're working on a solution for cheeses and flours. And so it's incredibly meaningful to me that because of the support that we've received from consumers and people all across the globe, I have the ability to take my ideas that I've had in notebooks for a long time, just like many of you, and take them one step further. So.
Thank you. I have a question. To your right. Why did you, and I think your idea is fantastic, but I was wondering, why did you pick paper? And would you expand into bags, perhaps, and just putting the produce in the bags so to carry around?
That's a great question. So I picked paper because it was the only thing that I had access to as a kid. So, I picked paper because it was cheap and I had craft paper and lots of paper in like my house, and that was why I started with paper. But then as I started to evolve the idea, I realized that paper was actually really effective because it was very low cost. It was something that could be compostable, that could be used in a variety of environments. But now, we are looking at other vehicles for the technology. So one sheet is actually enough for an entire bag or for an entire carton. So that's kind of what makes it something that's very usable in a large-scale format. But we create larger sheets for larger applications, and we are looking at creating containers for large-scale applications like shipping that have the technology embedded. So, yeah, it's a great question.
Hi, first, I just want to thank you for being here and being so inspiring to this group of inventors. Great. I'm speaking here tomorrow, and I only hope to evoke half as much inspiration and emotion as you did, so thanks. My question is, as you went from that one single farmer's market to the global company that you are today, what was the biggest obstacle you faced in scaling, and how did you solve that?
There were so many obstacles, and I think the only thing that saved me is that I knew nothing about manufacturing and production. I had no idea what to expect, because I think if I knew back then what I might face, I think I would have been really intimidated. But it is, it's almost a reinvention at every step. When I went from making FreshPaper in my kitchen, which really was kind of the size of this podium, because I lived in a studio apartment in Cambridge, so it was really small. And I remember my biggest obstacle back then was actually having the space to dry my sheets, because I would create the sheets, but then I started to run out of floor space to dry them. So the biggest innovation for me was like getting a bunch of drying racks, and then it was getting fans from Home Depot. And every time I brought in one of these things, it would like double my capacity, and it was huge, and I was so proud of myself. And then we got the order from Whole Foods, and it went well, and all of a sudden, everything that I had learned was useless because I had to figure out how to make thousands and thousands of sheets, and then very soon after that, it was millions of sheets. So I think, at every single step, I would kind of go back and restart the process. But one thing that was really useful was Google. I remember going and Googling every single question I might have, like from how to build a pallet to figuring out what palletizing is. I remember doing that and building my first pallet on the street in Cambridge. But then there was also a lot of manufacturing capacity in the United States that was being underutilized, because a lot of manufacturing had gone overseas. And so I was really amazed by how many manufacturers, especially in the paper industry, would actually take a meeting with me and sit down and share some of their know-how and work with me to figure out how to scale the technology. So some of the partners that we work with even today are people that I reached out to when I was still sitting in my studio apartment. And they've grown with us and scaled with us. And I think that's been one of the most fulfilling parts of this journey is seeing how we've been able to support their enterprises and to help them scale their businesses as well. So that's been really exciting, but it was certainly challenging.
Okay, to your left, Kavita, over here.
Yeah.
My name is Keith Waters. I'm president of the Tennessee Inventors Association. And you talk about the years that it took for you to get into production and to start your idea and get going. You were young, and it took years to get your mindset to where you can start producing this thing. A lot of people here are not even aware of inventors associations, and we try to help people and guide them to the right processes and the right people. Do you think that would have helped your journey to be a part of an association, or maybe encourage people to join inventor associations to speed up their process, so to speak?
I think for sure. I think it's incredible that there are so many organizations and associations that are looking to help inventors and entrepreneurs. And I think there are many more even than when I started. But to be honest, just like you said, I was not aware of all of the resources that were available. And I think now with access to the databases on the internet, with events like this, that ability to find resources is amplified. And I often think about how different my life might have been if I had come to an event like this when I was in high school, when I was a teenager. If I had been exposed to people like the experts that are here today, I might have thought it was possible. Because a lot of what held me back is just I had never seen somebody who looked like me, who had done it before, who had been a CEO, or who had taken an idea to market. And I think that's what is incredible about these organizations, is that they show you that it is possible and you can do it.
And I'll add to that. If you don't know, Chris, if you can stand up. This is Chris. Keith, if you could stand up. They are members of the United Inventor Association. If you have questions about a chapter in your state or area, talk to them. Don, I believe, yes? Yeah, Kentucky and Tennessee. So you've got more over here in New York. So if you have questions about belonging to an inventors group for support, a network, an opportunity to meet with people who may share the like mind you have, come talk to these people. That was my shameless plug.
by the way. We met
That's
here.
amazing. I wish I had known you.
No. Please look us up, DC Inventors.
So that's my shameless plug. Thank you all. And you have another question in the middle.
Hi there. So thank you so much for being here. I cannot believe how inspirational you are and impressive.
Thank you.
To keep everything in the United States is something else that we don't do enough of currently. And for you to be able to do that and then still be able to give back to the community.
Thank you.
I want to
appreciate
be
that.
you.
Honestly, I started doing that because I couldn't afford the scale that was needed to manufacture overseas. So, and we were driven by mission, and so I wanted to see if it was possible in the US. And a lot of people said that it wasn't, but we just did it step by step, really the old-fashioned way. But, I think it kind of helped that we had that disadvantage. I didn't have the funding or the resources to order large containers.
So do you work with families still, or did you, as you've gotten larger, decide that it's the separation of church and state?
So my co-founder is my husband. He's in the back.
Oh.
Yeah. So we're a family business, but we have we have lots of people on our team now that have come from many different backgrounds, and I think that diversity is what has made us successful, because we have people of all ages and all different backgrounds that have really contributed to bring this mission forward. So Kevin, he lives in LA. We talk all the time, but he found his passion was woodworking, because he actually hand created every single wooden crate display unit that went into Whole Foods. So he handmade them with his roommates, and his roommate actually did all our photography, some of which you'll still see in my presentation. So the two of them, they made these crates by hand, I think like 300 that had to go to Whole Foods, and he discovered that his passion was really woodworking. So he does that now, but he's still an advisor and a friend.
Well, thank you for the presentation. It was really inspirational. So I have two questions for you. First is, you actually filed your patents early on, like when you were much, much younger. So at that time, how do you decide what to patent and what to keep as a trade secret?
So I got really good advice. I think most of the trade secrets came as we scaled the manufacturing, because it was really challenging to actually produce the product at scale and to do it with the efficacy. So that is where most of our trade secrets came. And then, obviously I iterated on the product. So I started working on it when I was 12, but the product as it is today is very, very different from how it started. But because I was able to get a patent to protect that key element of it, I think that made a huge difference.
Sorry, one more question. So since you started the company with your husband, which is a fantastic idea, I have heard from a lot of investors and people in like the business world. They talk about, they're really hesitant to invest in any companies that are formed by like family members, because they worry that any sort of like problem within the relationship would affect the business. So how do you manage that, and like what are the problems or challenges that you have encountered along the way?
That's a great question, and that's one that we get all the time. But I think for us, it has been such an incredible and unbelievable and incredibly crazy ride. So, we always talk about how we could not imagine not having had that shared experience together, because my life changed, his life changed, our circumstances changed, and the trajectory of this idea changed almost overnight. But for me, it had also been, overnight and 18 years in the making. And so I think, for us, it has been a huge support to go through that together, because as much as it's been exciting, it's been really challenging. And there are moments that, I didn't feel like I could go forward. And to have somebody by my side who can relate to that, because we're literally in the same boat, I think has been tremendously valuable. We also, I think, have very different interests. We're very different people, but we really care about this idea, and we really care about the mission. So I think for us it worked, but I think, when you have an idea and you're thinking about creating a team, the most important thing is to find somebody that you feel like you can trust, who shares your vision for your idea. I think that at the end of the day is what has made it possible for us. I mean, I had so many doors closed in my face. I was laughed out of so many rooms, so I'm sure. But, I stopped at one point trying to pinpoint what it was, because there were so many times I was the youngest woman in the room. I was the only person of color. I was like the person who was least experienced. So I think, for me, I learned to just keep going forward one small step at a time and to do what worked for us. So, yeah.
I'm over here.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Julie. I came from Texas to be here. And I just really want to thank you for continuing to do this. I'm the grandmother and the mother of kids with autism. The biggest loss besides, anxiety and trying to do everything is a lost income. And so whenever I go to help my daughter, one of the biggest frustrations I have is we'll go buy groceries and then we don't have time to go again to the store, so food goes bad. So like with children, and I think 1 in 6 children in the US now have disabilities. For parents of children with disabilities, this is like a lifesaver. So I just really want to encourage you to get into those communities, and I will help you. I'd be glad to help. And but I wanted to ask you, you said that you now are working with nonprofits. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like what are, is it for outreach, or is it for more like marketing? Because I wish I had heard of this sooner.
Yeah, well, I would love to connect with you. So definitely come find me. And I think thank you for what you said. That's really meaningful. And honestly, it's stories like that keep me going, because as I was saying, it hasn't been a straight path. And I think whenever I hear from somebody that has used FreshPaper and that it has impacted their life in that way, it really gives everybody on our team the encouragement to keep going. But I think, having that vision that we could benefit nonprofits that are working to increase food access in their communities is what got us through our toughest times. So now we feel really proud that we can work with organizations like the Food Bank of New York City, but we actually also work with a lot of local and regional organizations. And we even work in some disaster relief foundations. So we do a lot of work wherever there is an ability to keep food fresh. For food banks, sometimes even a 1 or 2 day extension on shelf life can make a huge difference. So many times they'll get donations that are at the end of their shelf life, but they could feed families if they could just last 1 or 2 days more. So we come in sometimes with things like pallet liners that we can donate to food banks, but often we actually donate FreshPaper packs to communities so that people can take them home, so that children in schools, maybe if they're growing food in a school garden, or if they're getting a subsidized fruit bag, they can actually use that to keep their fruit fresh for longer. But for everybody on our team, that is what drives us and what gets us excited. So I would love to hear the work that you're doing, and definitely come find me, because we'll make sure we connect. Yeah.
Question.
Hi, Kavita. Thank you. One takeaway, then a question. The takeaway is, I think a lot of people I've talked to have come here saying, how do I protect this idea so people don't rip us off? And one of the answers we've gotten is, no matter what you do, it's probably going to happen. But what I heard from you is that if your story and your mission are so compelling, then the knockoffs will always be a step behind, which is inspiring for us moving forward. My question is, have you found as much success online, like with Amazon, with these products, and how did you get into that?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons that this has all been possible for us is the internet. And I think it's incredible how disadvantaged entrepreneurs, especially, even if you can't raise money, you can get on the internet and immediately access a global audience. So I actually recently testified in Congress about this, because we were one of the first businesses to actually start selling globally without even realizing it. I set up a website using BigCommerce, because that was what I had heard of, and I didn't realize that I had actually enabled international shipping. And so I remember when we got our first order from Canada, I was like, oh, I can figure that out. So we shipped to Canada and then Mexico, and then I got my first order from the UK, and I was blown away. I think Richard Branson had blogged about us or something. So it would always be a tidal wave, and there wasn't enough time to turn it off. So all of a sudden I had thousands of orders going to Europe, and we had to figure it out. And we actually went to the post office, and they helped us figure out customs, and we shipped all across the globe for a year, going to the post office and filling out each customs form by hand. And then somebody one day, I think, told me oh, there's a tool on the internet called Shopify, and they can just do that digitally. It probably saved us an hour per shipment. So I started to use that, and there's so many services now, I think, on the internet too, like Shopify, BigCommerce, just like PayPal, and UPS has this program called Mail Innovations that can actually enable you to go, as we did, almost from a farmer's market stand to being a global business overnight. And so I really encourage all of you to think global from day one. And I think, one of the reasons that I think it's so important to have a really simple and accessible idea and a design as well is that if you have a global audience, it's a lot easier to start to self-fund your business because your customer base is that much bigger.
Broadly speaking, how did you do your small-scale manufacturing, both when you took over the lunch hour at the post office when we're driving up to the back of the Whole Foods, and how did you evolve into larger manufacturing, and how did you protect broadly speaking, how did you protect your intellectual property during all this evolution?
Yeah, well, I think our small scale manufacturing was so simple that you probably wouldn't believe it. Like one of the things that I still remember was the day I went to Staples and I was worried my credit card was going to get declined because I was buying like 100 paper cutters. So I ordered like all of their paper cutters and then I went online and I had 100 shipped to the store because that was how we were initially doing our manufacturing. Like most people couldn't believe that we went into the North Atlantic and Whole Foods really cutting everything by hand. And so we had really simple systems. And a lot of that is because I didn't have funding. We were very resource constrained. But because I did every single step and we kind of had to engineer every single step using the most simple tools, I think that changed everything for me when we had to scale. Because I was aware of every step, I had thought about efficiencies for every step. And then when we started to talk to the large scale factories, I was able to work with them to find efficiencies at every step of the production process. So I think, that initially I wasn't even concerned about protecting it because I thought of what we were doing as like baking cookies on a large scale. But then when we started to talk to manufacturers, we put agreements in place and NDAs. And to be honest, most of them were so happy to have the work that I think, they were more than willing to just share their know-how and to help us figure it out with the sense that this was going somewhere. So.
Hi, my name's Randy Hill, and I actually work here at USPTO. This is the first time hearing this, and I'm sorry, but I've never heard of this. But as I listened to you, I got to thinking of other things and other business areas that might be of interest. And the reason I'm saying this is 25 years ago, I was in the military and I was in Okinawa, Japan, and we were getting food that was 6 months old that was being shipped to us that had to have a life so that we could eat it. And so you said you've talked with Congress. The question is, has anyone from the military approached you with the use of this product in the military? The next question is, you mentioned you come from the Cambridge area. That's the land of farms and bios. Have you talked to any of the pharmaceuticals or the bio companies in that area about the use of this product with medicines or anything along that area? And it may be ideas you hadn't thought about, but it's something I just came to mind.
Thank you. Those are great suggestions. And, I think we have recently been thinking about how we might be able to work with the military because I think for us, a long time, our biggest barrier was actually achieving scale. There was a long time where we just weren't sure if we were going to be able to achieve the scale to start to work with organizations like Walmart. And I remember actually for years, we had to say no to Walmart because we didn't feel ready. And so I think now that we are at that scale, we would love to start to partner with other organizations like the military, where I think, our technology could really be beneficial. So yeah, thank you for those suggestions. Those are fantastic.
How many foreign countries have you applied for your patent? How many patents do you have?
So I have 4 patents now, and now that I have the time, we've actually been applying for a lot more because I have the ability to pursue my ideas. But we were able to start going global, very early on, and I think I didn't actually think about getting IP in other countries initially. And then what I was really amazed to hear is that it's what I was saying earlier. Most of the organizations that we partnered with internationally, they were coming to us because of the traction that we had in the United States. And they were really excited about being part of that brand story and being part of the work that we were doing here. So, I think that was a tremendous advantage as we started to think global.
This is our last question.
Kavita, thank you. I was wondering, you may have spoken to this, if you could speak a little bit about the process you went through for the prototype stage.
Pardon me, could you
talk a little bit about the process and your thinking process and what you actually did during that prototype stage?
Yeah, I think when I was initially trying to get FreshPaper out into the world, I was just trying to figure out if it could be useful to anyone because, as you know, I had given up on it. So I didn't think it would really be useful to anyone that I was accessing, but I started to take it to my farmers markets, to the local farmers. So, I didn't talk about this, but I actually didn't think that the consumers would even consider it in Cambridge. I thought that maybe if some of the farmers could use the technology, they could keep their food fresh long enough that they could donate it at the end of the day. So that was my model. But as soon as I got there, I started to see that people were interested in this idea of keeping food fresh at home. And so that was really how I started to just iterate from there. So I would talk to my customers. They would come back and they'd say, oh, I use this in cherries. Or I had a customer that said, oh, I put it in my shoes. Like, you know, there were so many things that I learned from talking to the people that were actually using FreshPaper that helped me figure out what kind of material to use, what concentrations to use, what potential applications could be. And I think that made all of the difference, was taking it out of my garage, out of my kitchen, into the hands of farmers and people that were actually using it.
All right. I would like to thank Kavita for a great presentation. Thank you. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. I will let you take a rest now. At this time, we are about to take a 30-minute break. So if you're watching online, come back in 30 minutes. We are going to have our next panel called Swim with the Sharks. This panel is an exciting panel. As you can see in the afternoon, we have been building our presentations up. This panel will focus on what happens when you get that national exposure. How does it affect your business? What happens to your business plan? And are you ready? So all of the people who will be coming on the next panel in 30 minutes will be talking about their experience going live on Shark Tank and what they learned from being on the show and how it affected them professionally. So at this time, you have 30 minutes. The booths are open. Some of the speakers are out in the space. So if you have an opportunity to go check out the booths, if you haven't already, we will see you back here in 30 minutes.